Emmett Till was a 14-year-old African-American boy from Chicago who traveled to Mississippi in the summer of 1955 to visit relatives. At the time, the American South was deeply segregated under Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial discrimination and created a climate of fear and injustice for black citizens. On August 24th, Emmett and a few other black teenagers visited Bryant's Grocery, a small store owned by a white couple. Caroline Bryant, the woman working at the store, later accused Emmett of inappropriate behavior, claims that were never proven, and which she herself partially recanted decades later. Just a few nights later, Emmett was abducted from his great-uncle's home by two men, Roy Bryant and his half-brother J.W. Millam. Despite his family's desperate pleas, Emmett was taken away and later found deceased under horrifying circumstances. The brutality of his murder and the open casket funeral held by his mother shocked the world. Photographs of Emmett's body were published nationwide and became a rallying cry for the civil rights movement. In fact, Rosa Parks later said she had Emmett in mind when she refused to give up her seat on the bus. Despite clear evidence and public outrage, the two men were acquitted by an all-white jury, a painful reminder of the injustice that was deeply rooted in that era. Emmett Till's story is not just a tragedy, it's a turning point in American history, one that exposed the deep wounds of racism and helped ignite a national fight for equality. Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Likens was a teenage girl from Indiana whose tragic story is considered one of the most heartbreaking cases of child abuse in U.S. history. In 1965, Sylvia and her sister Jenny were temporarily placed in the care of Gertrude Benishevsky, a woman struggling financially and raising several children on her own. Sylvia's parents, carnival workers who often traveled, agreed to pay Gertrude a small amount each week to look after the girls. At first, everything seemed normal. But after a missed payment, tensions grew in the household, and tragically, Sylvia became the target of Gertrude's growing frustration. Accusations, insults, and verbal attacks quickly escalated into something much darker. Gertrude began to encourage her own children and neighborhood kids to participate in bullying Sylvia. Over time, what started as name-calling turned into physical punishment, isolation, and cruel acts of humiliation. Despite Sylvia's obvious distress, the abuse continued to worsen over the weeks. She was often denied food, falsely accused of behavior she hadn't committed, and subjected to acts of cruelty that no child should ever endure. The environment became more and more dangerous, and despite a few signs of concern from neighbors and even teachers, help never arrived in time. On October 26, 1965, Sylvia passed away as a result of her injuries. Her story shocked the nation and led to significant changes in child protection laws. Today, Sylvia's memory serves as a stark reminder of the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong, protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Junko Furuta. Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old high school student from Japan whose story became one of the most well-known and tragic examples of youth violence in modern history. On November 25, 1988, Junko was on her way home from her part-time job when she was approached by a group of teenage boys. Their plan was to stage a fake rescue to gain her trust. One of them pretended to help her after another knocked her off her bike. But their true intentions were far more sinister. Junko was taken to a house where she would be held against her will for 40 days. During this time, she was subjected to unspeakable mistreatment. The people responsible manipulated her and her family, forcing her to make phone calls claiming she had run away and was staying with friends. This delayed the investigation and gave her captors more time to continue their abuse unchecked. Even more disturbing, the house she was kept in was not abandoned or isolated. It belonged to one of the perpetrators, and his parents were present. Though they suspected something was wrong, they were afraid to speak out due to fear of their son's violent behavior. Throughout those 40 days, Junko endured extreme physical and emotional suffering. Her health rapidly declined, and despite several chances where someone could have intervened, no one came to her aid. On January 4, 1989, after a particularly violent episode, Junko tragically passed away from her injuries. Her body was placed in a metal drum and abandoned at a construction site. When police discovered her remains, the public outcry was immense. Her story deeply impacted Japanese society and led to discussions about juvenile crime laws, parental responsibility, and the importance of community intervention. Though her life was cut tragically short, Junko Furuta's story lives on as a haunting reminder of what can happen when abuse is ignored and justice is delayed. The Munster Rebellion in the early 1500s, Europe was a place of intense religious upheaval amid the chaos of the Protestant Reformation. A radical Christian group called the Anabaptists believed that society needed to be reborn quite literally. Their movement soon led to one of the most extreme and violent uprisings of that era, the Munster Rebellion. In 1534, a group of Anabaptist leaders seized control of the city of Munster in present-day Germany. Under the leadership of Jan Matthys, and later John of Leyden, the city was declared a theocratic New Jerusalem. Traditional laws were thrown out, communal property was introduced, and polygamy was even legalized. At first, their vision drew in followers from across Europe. But soon, the radical rule and harsh religious policies alarmed neighboring regions. A coalition of Catholic and Protestant forces united to lay siege to the city, which lasted over a year. By 1535, the rebellion collapsed. The leaders were captured and sentenced to a punishment that became infamous throughout Europe. As a warning to anyone who might attempt such an uprising again, the three main figures, John of Leyden, Bernhard Knipperdolling, and Bernhard Krechting, were executed publicly in a brutal and prolonged manner. Historical records describe methods designed to maximize suffering and send a message of fear. Their remains were then placed in iron cages, which were hung from the tower of St. Lambert's Church in Munster. Remarkably, those same cages are still visible today, empty but preserved as a powerful reminder of the past. The Munster Rebellion stands as a striking example of how religious extremism, political ambition, and fear can combine to shape a dark chapter in history, one that continues to be studied and reflected upon centuries later. Balthasar. Balthasar is remembered in history as the man who assassinated William the Silent, a key leader of the Dutch revolt against Spanish rule in the 16th century. William, also known as William of Orange, was a central figure in the fight for Dutch independence from the Spanish Empire. His leadership posed a significant threat to Spanish control, and tensions in the region were already extremely high. On July 10, 1584, Balthasar carried out the assassination in the city of Delft, believing that by eliminating William, he was fulfilling a divine and patriotic duty to Spain. However, the act shocked the public and became one of the earliest recorded political assassinations with massive national impact. It was quickly captured, and what followed was not only a trial, but a deliberate message from the authorities. His sentence was designed to reflect the gravity of his crime and to discourage others from following in his footsteps. Historical records describe how he was subjected to multiple days of torment before his execution. These included beatings, being suspended by his limbs, and other forms of punishment that were unfortunately common in that era. The goal wasn't just to punish him, but to make an example out of him in front of the public. On the day of his execution, his death was carried out in a highly public manner. Afterward, his body parts were displayed at various gates of the city, a warning to all that betrayal and assassination would not be tolerated. Though he was reviled in the Netherlands for ending the life of one of their national heroes, his actions and the reaction to them became a turning point in the Dutch struggle for independence. William the Silent's legacy only grew after his death, and the Dutch continued to fight for their freedom, eventually achieving full independence from Spain. This story serves as a powerful reminder of the extreme political divisions of the time and the human cost of rebellion, revenge, and power. Hisashi Uchi. In 1999, a man named Hisashi Uchi became the victim of one of the most severe radiation accidents ever recorded. He was a technician working at the JCO nuclear fuel facility in Tokamura, Japan, and the events that unfolded would lead to 83 days of unimaginable suffering and a deep ethical debate across the world. It all began on September 30th. Due to time pressure to meet a production deadline, safety protocols were ignored. Uchi and two of his co-workers were manually preparing a batch of uranium, fuel, something that should be been done using machines in a highly controlled environment. As they poured a uranium solution into a tank, there was suddenly a bright blue flash. What happened in that moment was a nuclear criticality accident, a runaway chain reaction that releases a massive burst of radiation. Uchi, who was standing closest, absorbed an astonishingly high dose, far beyond what the human body can handle. At first, the symptoms didn't seem severe. He experienced dizziness, nausea, and some redness on his skin, all typical of acute radiation exposure. But within hours, doctors realized the damage was far worse than anyone had imagined. His DNA was catastrophically damaged. Blood tests showed severe chromosomal destruction, meaning his body could no longer produce new cells to heal or defend itself. His skin began to deteriorate rapidly, coming off in large sections. Even the removal of medical tape would tear away entire layers of tissue. Doctors wrapped his body in sterile gauze, which acted as a kind of artificial skin, but had to be changed daily, an incredibly painful process. Despite their efforts, his condition continued to deteriorate. He received countless blood transfusions, skin grafts, and was kept alive with machines that supported his breathing and circulation. But his body simply couldn't recover. His organs began to fail one by one, and despite flatlining multiple times, doctors revived him repeatedly, believing they had a duty to preserve life, even when the damage was irreversible. Uchi remained conscious for some of the early weeks, even apologizing to doctors and family, saying he didn't want to be a burden. But eventually, the toll became too great. After 83 excruciating days, his body could no longer fight. The case of Hisashi Uchi raised many serious questions, not only about nuclear safety and human error, but also about medical ethics. Should someone be kept alive when the body has lost the ability to heal? When pain is the only constant? There's no easy answer. What's clear is that Hisashi's story is not just about science. It's a story of sacrifice, of human resilience, and of the importance of protecting life by respecting procedures, no matter how routine they may seem.